So we've come to North Wales to some of our favourite roads to put three very different takes on the ultimate hot hatch through their paces.
One of them is the most powerful you can buy, which is the A45S. We've got the GR Yaris, which you can now buy with an automatic gearbox. And we've also got the RS3, which has been around for a while, but it's had an update and it's got an amazing 5-cylinder engine.
They're all four-wheel drive, they've all got turbochargers. They all behave slightly differently, so we booked a day at the Anglesey circuit as well to see what they do.
I really enjoyed the Yaris. I drove it up here, so I spent quite a long time just getting to know it in normal roads. But as soon as we got up on the mountain roads in Snowdonia, it just feels perfectly at home. It's small and really nicely damped, but actually the body control is quite tight, so it works with all the lumps and bumps. The car's quite small, so you've got more road to play with. It's not massively quick, and this car's got the new automatic transmission, which, although it's paddle shift, I sort of got on with that a little bit better. I think I would still prefer the manual, if I'm honest, but the more time I spent in it, the more I really got to enjoy it as a road car and revelled in what it can do up here.
So the Yaris then, we know this engine, we love this engine, a little 1.6 turbocharged triple. It's got so much guts, but it feels even more responsive and more urgent because we've got an 8-speed automatic gearbox in this, so we've got close ratios. It's actually a torque converter, it's not a DCT. Toyota calls it a direct shift. And the changes are good. You put it in manual mode, there's a bit of a lag and it kind of slurs into gear a little bit. It doesn't absolutely snap like a DCT. But you know what? It makes the car feel relentless. You haven't got that pause of changing gear. I love the shift in the standard manual GR, but this kind of gives it a relentless intensity and even more performance. I mean, the standard car is something that's hard to stay with on a B road like this, but the auto, you can just flick-flack between the gears. So this is the Gen 2, and it's got 276 horsepower, which is a little bit more than the original. And it kind of has a more boosty character. There's more turbo whistle in here, but it still sounds quite rough. It's not super parpy and musical like the RS3's engine. Nothing in a hot hatch is really, but it sounds quite industrial and mechanical. The whole car kind of feels like that, you know? There's no sort of histrionics, there's no jazz to it. It's just basic and it feels quite raw. A massive fun. Oh, these things are just awesome. As soon as you jump into it, it feels obviously a lot smaller than the other two and a lot more responsive and a bit more agile. And I find I have a better connection to it straight away.
The thing that was always so lovable about this car was its simplicity and its honesty, and that shines through from the moment you drive it. The other two cars kind of revel in their sophistication and their complexity and the amount of adjustability in the car. The Yaris comes at your driving pleasure and the best way to attack a great road from a completely different direction, I think. It's a very transparent character. You just get in it. It feels much smaller, which is helpful. There's less power, but you're straight on it. You know exactly what the car wants you to do. It communicates its limits and its characteristics really clearly, so you just find your feet so quickly and you just get down to having fun. You don't have to drive it fast to feel that either. It just has a tactility and an approachability and a kind of warmth, if that makes sense. It's just a welcoming, characterful car that you can enjoy on any roads. Of course, up here it's epic, and on many of these stretches, this car feels like it was born for the direction changes and the lumps and bumps. It really comes to life.
So the Audi's kind of grown on me throughout the test. And initially it's quite an intense car. I mean, if you ramp it up on all the modes, the engine's mighty, it's got loads of mid-range, sounds wicked, but initially I found it quite wide and quite big for a hot hatch. And you can drive it quickly, but you're almost hanging on to it, and it's got a bit of torque steer, and with that rear diff it can kick out and sort of get a bit jumpy. So it takes a bit of time to grow accustomed to it, but you kind of learn to just manhandle it and go for it, and then it comes alive.
As soon as you get in this car, the thing you fall in love with is that amazing 5-cylinder turbo engine. It's always been an absolute stunner. It's won no end of awards, and it's been the heart and soul of every car it's found itself in. It's getting a bit long in the tooth, but that doesn't matter. I think we're all here to celebrate great petrol engines while they're still with us, and this is certainly one of the best engines you can get. Not for any money, that's a big statement, but in any kind of car that you would wish to use as an everyday vehicle, it's really special. There's a little bit of Huracan and R8 in the tone and in the specialness, and clearly there's some relationship there between the 5-cylinder and 10-cylinder. But yeah, God, it makes such a special noise, and of the three cars we've got here, it produces the most pleasurable noise and the most impressive performance. From the moment you open the throttle, it just feels so muscular and smooth, and yet it's still got some fire at the top end. It's not like it gives everything low down and then you have to accept that you don't get the fireworks at the top. It's a real character, and it just gives this quite ordinary car in some respects. It's an Audi A3, isn't it? You see them everywhere, but this just has that special bit of exoticism which sets this car apart.
So you might think that the RS3 is all about that engine, and it is a wicked engine. It sounds amazing, so much torque. I think it's got the most character out of any engine here. But there's more to it than that. And if you really drive it hard, well, you notice that this thing has a really adjustable, exciting chassis as well. It does feel quite big on the road for a hot hatch, and quite lively over bumps, as you can probably see. But where older generations have been a bit wooden and not very adjustable, this latest car, this latest generation of RS3, has got a torque vectoring rear differential. They call it a torque splitter. And it just makes the RS3 feel really energized and adjustable, because you can get hard on the power, the rear takes a set, and then it kind of rotates underneath you. It doesn't feel completely natural at times. Sometimes the rear end can sort of hop and skip over bumps, and it can be a bit snappy, but once you get tuned in, you can drive it so hard, and it's rewarding in a way that old RS3s just weren't.
Mercedes, I've taken the longest to understand that car, I think. It's quite aloof in a way. It's very effective, and I kind of respect what Mercedes have done with it, but feels like a very Germanic exercise in what they can do with that platform of car. It's like it has to be the most powerful, it has to have this, it has to have that. but it's very within itself and quite contained. So you're struggling to find points of connection, particularly the steering. For me, it doesn't have any real on-centre feel. So I'm a little bit lost. You know, the grip's there, but you have to trust it's there rather than work your way into it. So yeah, it's a bit of a slow burn, I think, the Mercedes.
Okay, so on paper, this has the most ordinary engine of the three. It's a 2-litre 4-pot turbo, like you get in most hot hatches, but this is one with 416 horsepower. And the way it revs, I think it feels the most energetic at high revs of the three cars. I think the Audi feels a bit more muscular in the mid-range and it sounds better, but this is so revvy and short geared. And the box is good too. It's an 8-speed DCT, a lot crisper than the Yaris's torque converter, and you just kind of live at high revs in this car. Wow. I mean, the world is going nuts. We got a 400 horsepower plus 4-cylinder hot hatch here.
As a character, the A45 in some respects is hugely exciting. It's really, really powerful and very, very quick point to point. It's one of those class leading cars in many respects. That's always been its appeal. It packs a really hefty punch and a lot of technology to go with it. So you get a real sense of being in a super hatch almost because of the adaptive damping and just the way you can play around with the powertrain. So there's lots to engage with on the technology side, but I've always found them slightly aloof as cars to bond with. I think the root of that, for me at least, is there's almost no on-centre feel with the steering. So not only are you kind of trying to sense how much grip you've got, but you don't really get much impression of how hard you're working the car or how much you're loading it up. So even if you work on the basis that you kind of need to use your internal gyro to sense when it's reaching its limit of grip, it's really hard to connect with the car, and I find that frustrating because on the right stretch of road it's really nicely throttle adjustable and actually quite playful, surprisingly so. So it's a bit of a contradiction, a bit of an enigma. I'm hopeful that in a track environment, although this is not a track biased car, but should you take one on a track day, I think you would discover a different dimension of its dynamics and its performance. That's something to look forward to, but for now I'm going to grit my teeth and carry on this particularly bumpy road. So we're at Anglesey, which is a very different kettle of fish to the mountain roads we were on yesterday. Absolutely glorious conditions as well. And I'm back in the Audi, which says a lot because you tend to gravitate towards the car that you're enjoying the most on any of these tests. And I've really fallen for this in quite a big way, actually. I loved its character and its capability on the road. And on the track, you can really enjoy the full performance of the car, which is pretty spectacular, I have to say.
It's not a natural track car because again it's quite big and heavy, nearly 1600 kilograms, but it's super exciting when you get up it and you get the diff working, it almost feels rear drive, but it's still got really good traction. You can drive it really hard and it feels super quick. So yeah, I think as an all-round package, it's not a car that you take on a track, but when you drive it here, you kind of see what they're trying to do, how to make it more exciting than old RS3s, which are quite wooden, understeery things.
It's a curious mix of front-wheel drive car and rear-wheel drive car. It rarely feels like a conventional all-wheel drive car, if I'm honest. You really get a sense of why it has those oversized tyres on the front axle and the wider track at the front. Even on the track, it pulls itself around a little bit, and it's quite, not a handful, but it's certainly boisterous, shall we say. It rotates into the corner with great agility, which is where the front wheel drive feel comes from. But then as you pick the throttle up, it then comes out of the corner much more like a rear wheel drive car. So it requires a bit of thought, because you sort of engage two different sides of your driving brain almost. In a front wheel drive car, if it starts to slide, you need to keep the throttle pinned, but in this car, if it starts to slide, you have to balance the throttle more like you're in a rear wheel drive car.
And then you've got that engine. In the mid-range, it hits so hard. You don't actually need to be up in the revs the whole time. You can just ease it through and let the mid-range build. And it's massively exciting. And where you can feel it hopping and skipping on the road at the rear, as that diff starts to work, it does the same thing but at much higher speeds on a circuit. So you've got to be absolutely on it. It doesn't feel as stable and as flat and as racy as the Merc, but I think it gives you more options and it feels more on its toes, more adjustable.
We came to the track to fully explore the cars, free from road regulations and laws, and just to really push them to their limits. And I think that's when the Audi steps up a gear, because it's got these different modes and maybe a more playful four-wheel drive system, whereas the Yaris is much more consistent with how it is on the road.
So the Yaris is probably my favourite car on the road. It just gives you so much confidence. It's small, you can place it. And honestly, in real terms, it wasn't any slower than the other two. But on the circuit, it's really good, but it kind of doesn't come alive in the way that particularly the RS3 does. It's quite conservative in its setup. On the brakes into here, to get it moving, you kind of have to do a bit of that. It's not really a car that comes super alive and adjustable when you start putting loads through it. It just takes what you can give it. So you can't really knock it for that, but at the same time, I want a little bit more bite from this car. It's just not as exciting as the Merc, or particularly the RS3. Massively capable though, and probably the easiest of all three to drive quickly. The reason that it gives so much confidence on the road is what kind of is its undoing here, because it's not so adjustable and exciting as the other two, and it just does the same thing that it does on the road but at higher speeds, and you kind of just bleed into understeer. You can get it to move around, you can feel the diffs kind of working to keep you hooked up, but it's not like the other two in that they give you options on the throttle and you can drive them on the limit. So I like the Yaris, and I think it's probably the most accessible car, and straight away it feels the most approachable, but I think it doesn't quite have the peaks of especially the RS3.
All its qualities that you enjoy as a road car are still present and correct on track, but I think what you realise is it gives almost as much as it can give on the road. So you get to the track and think, right, I'm going to really drive quickly now, and you go for it, and there isn't really much left in reserve. Certainly in terms of the engine, it feels very outgunned here compared to the Audi and the Mercedes, which is understandable because it's over 100 horsepower down on the Audi and best part of 150 horsepower down on the Mercedes. It is a lot lighter. It's 1,300 kilos, so significantly lighter than both the German cars, but you can't really make up that power and torque deficit. You can work your way through the modes, and there's the normal mode, gravel and track. I think it does feel best in track, which is as you'd hope, but it doesn't fundamentally change the car or the extremes of the car in the way that the Audi and Mercedes can be turned into these cars that are quite happy to drift around. I don't mind that, if I'm honest, because you know, it is what it is, I suppose. You're expecting too much of this car, a much more simple car than the Germans, if you want it to suddenly transform into a different character of car. But I love that it's so generous on the road. If driving on the track tells you one thing, it's that this car drives its heart out on the road, and yeah, for that I absolutely love it. I think the surprise for me was the Mercedes on track, because suddenly all the missing feel and that doesn't really come into it on track, because you immediately turn in and you're not working in that woolly kind of numb zone that it spends most of its time in on the road, and you know it's fully loaded, and then suddenly you feel the balance in the car and you feel what the different modes do, and it's higher up the rev range more of the time, so you feel where that extra power lives, whereas for the most part the Audi seems the bigger, more muscular performer.
So I don't think any of us really gelled with the Mercs chassis on the road, but out here the way it feels quite low and flat and pointy kind of suits it. The steering's a bit slow for me, but as you can see there, it's quite adjustable when you get hard on the throttle. God, it's got a great balance. I think the Audi feels a bit taller than this, and actually, if anything, slightly heavier, even though it is the lighter car. Because the way this changes direction and how revvy it just feels super urgent and really racy. No, I like this thing on the track. The diff works in a similar way to the Audi in that you get on the throttle immediately and the car stays neutral, but if you stay committed and stay in the power, it gradually pivots towards oversteer. The Audi can feel quite sketchy when it does that, especially over bumps. It starts hopping and skipping at the rear. This is a bit more linear, I'd say, a bit more natural in how it breaks away. Still exciting. I mean, it moves around under brakes a bit. Get the nose in and use the throttle to neutralise it. Out of here. It's good. It's really good on track.
Yeah, the Mercedes was great fun around here, but it's just too heavy. Like if it was the weight of the Yaris, it wouldn't overwork its tyres, and you could really treat it as more like a GT3 911 or something. They kind of need to do a black series, I think, take a load of weight out and make it more aggressive, and suddenly you'd have this really super cool thing. It suddenly feels like the most powerful hatchback you can get, and it suddenly feels like a car with a interesting driver focused four-wheel drive system. It takes you a while to access it. You have to go through the motions, put it in track mode, put it in manual mode, put traction in sport, and then in completely switched off and then engage drift mode, and then it asks you if you're sure, all the usual stuff. But once you're there, it really comes alive. We could record 2 endings to this film, because I can get it set in my head, right, yeah, absolutely, definitely the Yaris is the best road car. And then I look over there and think, but which one would I like to drive home? I'd probably want to be in the Audi, because it's, you know you're going to miss all of the cool stuff that car has. But oh man, I don't know. I think it probably, as an all-round ownership experience, the Audi has more about it, but it's a lot more money, so it should have those extra aspects that the Yaris doesn't. But I think to head to a great road in difficult conditions and certainly come to a place like Wales, I think the Yaris is still, it's the most special when it's right at its peak. I think it epitomises what an all-wheel drive car should feel like. But yeah, as it stands, I think my head goes with the Yaris, my heart goes with the RS3.